At 8:14 p.m. on the 1st of March 2007, a meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Peachtree City, Georgia, watched the radar screen. A thunderstorm moving east-northeast across Sumter County had begun to show a distinct hook echo. The velocity scan indicated a tight rotation near the center of the storm. This was a classic signature of a tornado forming. A tornado warning was issued immediately for Sumter County, including the city of Americus. The warning, broadcast over NOAA weather radio and relayed to local media, urged residents to take shelter. But it was a Thursday evening. The sun had set nearly an hour earlier. The sky was black. Many people were at home eating dinner or watching television. Others were attending a basketball game at the local high school. Few saw the storm coming. At 8:30 p.m., 16 minutes after the warning was issued, the tornado touched down. It touched down roughly 4 miles southwest of Americus, near the intersection of Georgia State Route 30 and Highway 195. The first structures to be hit were rural homes and farm buildings. The tornado quickly intensified. It was rain-wrapped, meaning the rain surrounding it obscured the funnel from view. There was no way to see it in the dark. The only warning was the sound, a roar that grew louder as it approached. By 8:32 p.m., the tornado had crossed into the city limits of Americus. It struck the Americus High School campus. The main building, a large brick structure built in the 1920s, took a direct hit. The roof was torn off. The gymnasium collapsed. Cars in the parking lot were tossed into piles. Fortunately, the school was empty at that hour. No students were there, but the damage was catastrophic. From the high school, the tornado continued east-northeast through the heart of Americus. It passed through a residential neighborhood of older houses and mobile homes. At 8:35 p.m., it struck a mobile home park on the east side of town. Mobile homes offer almost no protection against tornadoes. Here, the worst of the fatalities occurred. Entire homes were lifted off their foundations and disintegrated. The debris was scattered across fields. At 8:38 p.m., the tornado crossed U.S. Highway 19, tossing vehicles and uprooting trees. By 8:42 p.m., it had reached the outskirts of Americus, weakening as it moved into open farmland. The tornado lifted at 8:45 p.m. after being on the ground for approximately 15 minutes. Its path was 9 miles long and up to 400 yards wide. When the storm passed, the silence returned. Then came the sounds of sirens, car alarms, and screaming. The damage was severe. In Americus, 9 people were dead, more than 50 were injured. Hundreds of homes were damaged or destroyed. The high school was a total loss. The downtown area, which had a historic district of Victorian-era buildings, sustained heavy damage. Several churches were damaged. A gas station was flattened. Power lines were down across the county. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. The local hospital, Sumter Regional Hospital, treated dozens of injured people. Some were brought in by private vehicles because ambulances could not reach all the streets blocked by debris. What happened that night? The tornado was one of several that struck the southeast during a major outbreak on March 1st and 2/20 Rosevin. The same storm system had already produced deadly tornadoes in Alabama earlier that day. Across the region, 57 people were killed over 2 days. The Americus tornado was rated an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale. The National Weather Service estimated peak winds at 150 miles per hour. That rating placed it just below the most violent tornadoes on the scale, but the damage was still devastating. The path was relatively narrow, but the tornado moved through a densely populated part of the city. The combination of nighttime rain wrapping and vulnerable housing stock contributed to the high death toll. Who was involved? The victims included residents of the mobile home park, families in houses, and one person in a vehicle. The youngest victim was a 7-year-old boy. The oldest was 83. Some died instantly from blunt force trauma. Others were trapped under debris and died before rescuers could reach them. First responders worked through the night using flashlights and chainsaws to clear roads and search for survivors. The Georgia National Guard was called in the next morning. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, arrived within days to assess the damage and coordinate recovery. The community of Americus, population around 17,000, faced a long rebuilding process. Investigators from the National Weather Service conducted a damage survey the following day. They used aerial photography, ground observations, and interviews to map the tornado's path and determine its intensity. They measured the width, documented the damage to different types of structures, and assigned the EF3 rating based on the highest level of damage observed. They also looked at the warning process. The tornado warning was issued with a lead time of 16 minutes. That is considered a good lead time for a tornado, but not everyone received the warning. Some people did not have a weather radio. Others had their televisions turned off. The outdoor sirens in Americus did activate, but sirens are designed to be heard outdoors, not inside a well-insulated house. Many residents reported not hearing the sirens at all until the tornado was already on top of them. The question of how to reach people indoors during nighttime storms became a central issue after this event. How could this have happened? The meteorologists at the National Weather Service had detected the rotation early. They issued the warning promptly. The technology worked, but the human response depended on infrastructure and behavior. In rural areas of the South, especially with older homes, basements are rare. Many houses are built on concrete slabs. Safest place during a tornado is a basement or an interior room without windows. In Americus, few homes had basements. Mobile homes offered no protection. The community did not have tornado shelters or community storm shelters. People were forced to shelter in bathtubs, closets, or under mattresses. When a tornado strikes at night, visibility is zero. Even with a warning, people must guess where the storm is and whether they have time to move. Some waited too long. Some did not react at all. The systems that were supposed to protect the public had gaps. The warning went out, but the link between the warning and individual action was weak. The sirens were not loud enough inside homes. The media broadcast the warning, but many people were not watching. NOAA weather radios were not widely owned. There was no mandatory text alert system at the time. Cell phone alerts would not become widespread for several more years. The Americus tornado exposed a fundamental problem in tornado safety: how to get people to take shelter when the threat is invisible and the warning is only a voice on the radio. Beyond the immediate emergency response, investigators also examined the long-term recovery. Americus was a small city with a limited tax base. The damage to the high school alone was estimated at $15 million. The school had to be demolished and rebuilt. The community debated whether to rebuild the school on the same site or move it to a safer location. They decided to rebuild in place. The new school opened in 2009, designed with a reinforced safe room to withstand future storms. Several other public buildings also added tornado shelters. The city updated its emergency management plan, improved communication with the National Weather Service, and conducted public education campaigns about tornado safety. But the question of equity remained. Wealthier families could afford to retrofit their homes with safe rooms. Low-income families, especially those living in mobile homes, remained vulnerable. The Americus tornado is remembered not only for the 9 lives it took, but for the questions it left behind. Could the death toll have been lower if more people had access to shelter? Did the warning system fail the most vulnerable residents? What role did poverty and housing quality play in the disaster? These are not easy questions. They require examining the intersection of meteorology, public policy, and social inequality. The tornado was a natural event, but the disaster was shaped by human decisions, where people lived, how they were warned, and what resources they had to protect themselves. The United States experiences more tornadoes than any other country. The Southeast is particularly vulnerable because tornadoes there often occur at night, move quickly, and are hidden by rain. The Americus tornado was a textbook example of that vulnerability. It was not the largest tornado of the outbreak, nor the deadliest, but it happened in a town that was not prepared for a direct hit. And its legacy is a set of lessons that continue to influence tornado safety efforts across the region. As the search and rescue operations wound down over the following days, the true scope of the loss became clear. 9 families had lost loved ones. Hundreds of families had lost their homes. The high school, a community landmark for nearly a century, lay in ruins. The recovery would take years, but the story of the Americus tornado is not just a story of destruction. It is a story of resilience, of a community that pulled together, of a slow but determined effort to rebuild stronger. And it is a story that raises uncomfortable truths about who survives natural disasters and who does not, about where the warnings go and where they stop. The investigation into the Americus tornado did not end when the survey team filed its report. It continued in emergency management offices, in city council meetings, in classrooms where meteorologists taught the next generation of forecasters. The central question remained the same. How do we protect people from a threat that comes out of the night, unseen and often unheard until it is too late? There is no simple answer. But the people of Americus, like so many communities hit by tornadoes across the South, learned that preparation is not a one-time act. It is an ongoing process of awareness, investment, and community commitment. The tornado of March 1, 2007 left scars that are still visible, but it also left a blueprint for how to face the next storm. The next storm, as everyone in the Southeast knows, is never far away. In the weeks that followed, the Federal Emergency Management Agency opened a disaster recovery center in Americus. By March 10, 2007, over 500 households had registered for assistance. The agency distributed millions of dollars in grants and low-interest loans for temporary housing, home repairs, and uninsured property loss. But the process was slow. Many families had no insurance because they could not afford it. Others had policies that did not cover wind damage from tornadoes, a common gap in standard homeowners insurance in the rural South. The recovery center became a place of long lines, frustrated conversations, and quiet grief. The high school rebuilding project took center stage in Americus. The original building, constructed in 1916, had been a landmark for generations. When the tornado struck, it tore the roof off the main building, collapsed the gymnasium, and shattered windows throughout the campus. The damage was so extensive that the school district declared the structure a total loss. Students were relocated to temporary classrooms, a former Walmart building converted into a makeshift school. The community debated for months whether to rebuild on the same site or move to a safer location farther from the tornado's path. The city council held public hearings. Engineers evaluated the soil and the risk. In the end, the decision was made to rebuild in place, but with a critical change. The new school would include a reinforced safe room designed to withstand winds of up to 250 miles per hour, far exceeding the intensity of the tornado that had destroyed its predecessor. The safe room was funded by a combination of federal grants, state contributions, and local fundraising. It was built as a separate structure within the school campus, capable of holding over 1,000 people. The walls were made of 12-inch reinforced concrete. The roof was anchored with steel cables. The doors were blast-rated. When the safe room was completed in 2009, it became a model for other schools in the region. The cost was approximately $2 million. That amounted to roughly 20% of the total school rebuilding cost, but the community considered it money well spent. The question that lingered was whether the same investment could be made for every vulnerable building in the county. The answer then and now was no. The Americus tornado was not an isolated event. It was part of a larger outbreak that produced 47 confirmed tornadoes across Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina between February 28 and March 2, 2007. The outbreak killed 20 people total, injured over 300, and caused more than $300 million in damage. The strongest tornado of the outbreak was an EF4 that struck Enterprise, Alabama on March 1, just hours after the Americus tornado. That tornado destroyed Enterprise High School, killing 8 students who were trapped in a hallway when the roof collapsed. The two events shared a common theme: schools and communities that lacked adequate shelter. In Enterprise, the high school had no basement, no safe room, and no fortified interior space. The students and staff took cover in hallways, which proved deadly when the walls gave way. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning for Enterprise with a lead time of nearly 20 minutes, but the school did not have a weather radio. The warning was broadcast on local television, but the school was not monitoring. The principal later said he heard the sirens but did not have time to move students to a safer location because there was no designated safe area. The Enterprise and Americus tornadoes, occurring on the same day, prompted a national conversation about school safety in tornado-prone areas. The American Meteorological Society published a study in 2008 that examined the warning process, the structural vulnerabilities, and the human factors. The study found that while tornado warnings had improved significantly since the 1970s, public response remained inconsistent. The study recommended that schools in tornado-prone regions install weather radios, conduct regular tornado drills, and designate fortified safe rooms. It also recommended that communities consider building public storm shelters, especially in mobile home parks and low-income neighborhoods. Mobile homes were a recurring factor in tornado fatalities across the Southeast. According to data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, mobile home residents account for approximately 40% of tornado deaths in the United States, even though mobile homes make up only about 6% of the housing stock. The reason is simple: mobile homes offer virtually no protection against tornado winds. They have thin walls, lightweight roofs, and are often anchored to the ground with straps that can fail. In the Americus tornado, the mobile home park was where the deadliest scene unfolded. 6 of the 9 fatalities were in mobile homes. The remaining 3 were in site-built houses, 2 of which were older homes with no foundation or basement. The question of why mobile home parks are so vulnerable is partly economic. Mobile homes are cheaper to buy and maintain, making them the only affordable housing option for many low-income families, retirees, and rural workers. The parks themselves are often located on land with lower property values, which can be more exposed to wind. There is no federal requirement that mobile home parks provide storm shelters. Some states, such as Oklahoma and Texas, have passed laws requiring new mobile home parks to install shelters, but enforcement is uneven. Georgia did not have such a law in 2007, and it still does not. After the Americus tornado, local advocacy groups pushed for a shelter requirement, but the effort stalled in the state legislature. The National Weather Service office in Atlanta, which issued the warning for Americus, conducted an internal review of its performance. The review concluded that the forecasters had acted correctly and that the warning was timely. But it also noted that the tornado formed quickly, and that the thunderstorm showed signs of rotation only 10 minutes before the tornado touched down. The lead time of 16 minutes was achieved because the rotation was detected early in the storm's life cycle, but that was partly due to the proximity of the Weather Service radar. The radar was located at Peachtree City, about 70 miles north of Americus. At that range, the radar beam was scanning at an altitude of about 5,000 feet above ground level. That meant it could detect rotation in the middle of the storm, but it could not see what was happening near the surface. The tornado was already on the ground when the radar first indicated a strong mesocyclone. The forecasters relied on reports from spotters and law enforcement to confirm the tornado. The spotter network in Sumter County was active, but only a few trained spotters were available that night. One spotter saw the tornado and called it in, but his report came after the warning was already issued. The timing of the tornado at night introduced another layer of difficulty. Nighttime tornadoes are more than twice as deadly as daytime ones, according to a 2008 study by the National Severe Storms Laboratory. The reasons include reduced visibility, higher likelihood of people being asleep, and lower probability of receiving warnings through visual cues like dark clouds or approaching roar. In Americus, many residents reported that they did not see the tornado coming. They heard a freight train sound, but by the time they recognized it, the tornado was already upon them. Some sheltering decisions were made in seconds. One survivor said she grabbed her 2 children and jumped into a bathtub, covering them with a mattress. The tornado ripped the roof off her house, but the bathtub remained intact. She and her children survived. Another survivor, a man in his 60s, was in a mobile home. He said he did not hear the sirens because he had his television on and was watching a movie. He realized something was wrong when the windows began to shake. He tried to get to a neighbor's house, but was killed when the mobile home rolled over. The aftermath of the Americus tornado also revealed the gaps in recovery assistance for low-income families. FEMA's Individual Assistance Program provides grants of up to $30,000 for home repairs, but the average grant in 2007 was around $5,000. That was not enough to rebuild a destroyed mobile home, which could cost $15,000 to $30,000 new. Many displaced families were forced to rent apartments in nearby towns, but affordable housing was scarce. Some families moved in with relatives. Others left Americus entirely, unable to afford the cost of staying. The city's population declined slightly in the years following the tornado, a trend that had begun before the storm but accelerated afterward. The long-term economic impact was significant. The high school rebuilding cost $15 million. The city lost tax revenue from damaged businesses. The agricultural sector, a major employer in Sumter County, suffered because the tornado destroyed several barns, grain silos, and equipment sheds. The insurance payouts were slow. Some farmers had to take out loans to replant crops. The disaster declaration allowed for federal aid to the state, but the process of applying for funds was bureaucratic. Local officials spent months filling out forms and attending meetings. Beyond the physical damage, the psychological toll on the community was profound. The tornado struck at a time when many people were already anxious about severe weather. The month of February 2007 had been unusually warm and humid, and the outbreak that produced the Americus tornado was the largest tornado outbreak in the United States in over a year. The memory of the 2004 and 2005 hurricane seasons was still fresh. For many residents, the tornado reinforced a sense of vulnerability that had not been there before. A study published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress in 2010 found that survivors of the Americus tornado reported elevated rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety even 2 years after the event. Children were especially affected. Many had nightmares. Some refused to go to bed without a parent present. The school district provided counseling services for students, but the need exceeded the availability of mental health professionals in the area. The Americus tornado also led to changes in how the National Weather Service communicates tornado warnings. In 2007, the Weather Service still relied heavily on text-based products. The tornado warning was a set of polygon coordinates and a text description. The public had to interpret that information, often through a television or radio broadcast. In 2008, the Weather Service began experimenting with impact-based warnings, which included more specific language about the severity of the threat, such as "This is a particularly dangerous situation." In 2012, the agency officially rolled out the new warning format nationwide. The Americus tornado, along with the 2011 super outbreak that killed over 300 people, helped drive the change. The goal was to make warnings more actionable, especially for people who were not familiar with meteorological terms. But the most significant change in tornado warning technology came from outside the Weather Service: the widespread adoption of wireless emergency alerts, or WEA, on mobile phones. The first WEA messages were sent in 20 netwo. By 2015, the system was active across the country. The alerts are sent to all mobile phones within a defined area, making them effective for reaching people who are asleep or not watching television. After the Americus tornado, local emergency managers had no way to send a text alert to every phone in the warning area. Today, that capability exists. But questions remain about whether people will respond to a buzz on their phone at 2 a.m. Studies suggest that many people ignore WEA messages, either because they are conditioned to expect false alarms or because they do not understand the severity. The lessons from Americus extend beyond technology. They touch on the fundamental issue of social equity in disaster preparedness. The mobile home park in Americus was a low-income community. Many residents did not have cars. Some did not have insurance. Most did not have a safe place to go. The idea of building a community storm shelter had been discussed in the years before the tornado, but the cost was prohibitive. After the tornado, the local emergency management agency secured a grant to build a small shelter near the mobile home park. But the shelter had a capacity of only about 50 people. The park had over 100 residents. During the next tornado threat, the shelter was used, but not by everyone. Some residents said they did not know where it was. Others said they did not feel safe leaving their homes in the middle of the night. The Americus tornado, in the end, is not just a story about a weather event. It is a story about the choices a society makes, how much to invest in warning systems, how much to invest in shelter, and how to distribute those resources fairly. The United States spends billions of dollars on forecasting and warning, but comparatively little on the built environment that protects people from the consequences of those forecasts. The gap between a good warning and a safe outcome is filled by individual decisions, and those decisions are shaped by wealth, education, location, and luck. The 9 people who died in Americus did not die because the warning was late. They died because there was no safe place to go, or because they could not get there in time, or because they did not know they needed to go. Those are failures of preparation, not prediction. As the years passed, Americus rebuilt. The new high school opened with its safe room. The city upgraded its siren system and added a weather radio distribution program. Sumter County applied for and received a grant to install tornado shelters at 3 other public schools, but the mobile home park remained vulnerable. No new shelter was built there. The residents continued to live in structures that could not withstand a direct hit. The next tornado might not hit the same park, but it would hit somewhere else. The cycle of disaster, recovery, and vulnerability repeated itself across the South in 2008, 2011, 2014, 2016, and 2010. Each time the questions returned: who was warned, who listened, who survived, and who did not? The answer was always the same. The most vulnerable were the most at risk, and the systems designed to protect them had not closed the gap. The Americus tornado remains a case study in meteorology classrooms and emergency management conferences. It is cited as an example of a well-forecasted event with a tragic outcome. It is used to illustrate the importance of nighttime tornado preparedness. It is referenced in debates about mobile home regulation and public shelter funding. But the most enduring lesson may be the simplest. A warning is only as good as the person who hears it, and a shelter is only as good as the person who can reach it. Until every community has both, the story of Americus will continue to repeat itself. At 1:58 a.m. on March 1, 2007, the National Weather Service office in Peachtree City, Georgia, issued a severe thunderstorm warning for Sumter County. The storm was moving northeast at 50 miles per hour. At 2:03 a.m., a tornado warning was issued for the southern half of the county. The warning was based on radar-indicated rotation. The storm had already produced a tornado in Lee County to the southwest. That tornado had touched down at 1:49 a.m. and tracked for 6 miles before lifting. Now the same storm cell was approaching Americus. The warning stated, "A tornado has been observed by trained spotters. Take cover immediately." But most residents were asleep. The outdoor warning sirens in Americus were activated at 2:05 a.m. For the next 4 minutes, the sirens sounded. Then at 2:09 a.m., the tornado touched down on the southwest side of the city. The storm was not a surprise to meteorologists. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk of severe weather for the region earlier that afternoon. The forecast called for strong tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds. The SPC had issued a tornado watch for western Georgia at 10:25 p.m. the previous evening. That watch was expanded to include Sumter County at 11:45 p.m. By midnight. The ingredients were in place: a dry line to the west, a warm front approaching from the south, and a strong jet stream overhead. The atmosphere was unstable. The storm that struck Americus was a supercell that developed near the Alabama border and intensified as it moved into Georgia. It produced a tornado rated EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with winds estimated at 155 miles per hour. The tornado was on the ground for 12 miles and reached a maximum width of 400 yards, but the warning process had a critical gap. The tornado warning was issued at 2:03 a.m. The tornado touched down at 2:09 a.m. That left only 6 minutes for residents to react. In a mobile home, 6 minutes might be enough to reach a shelter if one is nearby. But the closest storm shelter to the mobile home park was over a mile away. The park had no designated safe room. The residents had to make a decision: stay in their flimsy homes, run to a neighbor's house, or drive to a public building. Driving in the dark during a tornado warning is dangerous. Some residents did not have access to a car. Others could not hear the sirens because they had air conditioners running or televisions on. One survivor later recalled hearing the sirens but thinking it was a test. The city tested the sirens every Wednesday at noon. This was Thursday morning at 2:05 a.m. The mind could not reconcile the hour with the sound. What happened next is a matter of official record. The tornado struck the mobile home park with full force. Of the 9 fatalities, 7 were in mobile homes. One victim was a 63-year-old woman who lived alone. Another was a mother and her 2 children, ages 3 and 5. They were found huddled in a closet. The mother's body was covering the children, but the children did not survive. The 9th victim was a man who died when the roof of his frame house collapsed. The coroner's report noted that all deaths were caused by blunt force trauma. The tornado had lifted entire mobile homes off their foundations and thrown them across the street. Some were rolled into piles of twisted metal. The debris field was littered with personal belongings, photographs, clothing, toys, kitchen utensils. The search and rescue operation began immediately after the tornado passed. Local police and firefighters arrived within minutes. They were followed by Georgia State Patrol officers and personnel from the Georgia Emergency Management Agency. The first priority was locating survivors trapped under debris. With no power, the search was conducted with flashlights and chainsaws. It took 4 hours to extricate all the victims. The county coroner arrived at 3:30 a.m. and began the grim task of identifying the dead. The injured were transported to Sumter Regional Hospital, but the hospital had lost power and was running on backup generators. A triage center was set up at the Americus Recreation Department building. By dawn, the scope of the disaster was clear. Over 100 people had been injured. More than 200 homes were destroyed or damaged. The city was in shock. How could a well-forecasted tornado produce such a high death toll? Investigators from the National Weather Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency conducted a post-storm assessment. Their report identified several factors. First, the tornado struck at night when people were asleep. Second, the warning lead time was short. Third, the mobile home park had no shelters. Fourth, the outdoor sirens were not designed to wake people indoors. Fifth, many residents did not have weather radios. Sixth, the local emergency management did not have a system to send text alerts. Seventh, the city had limited resources to enforce building codes or retrofit vulnerable structures. The report concluded that the combination of these factors created a high-risk environment that the warning infrastructure could not overcome. The investigation also looked at the performance of the National Weather Service itself. The warning was issued in compliance with agency standards. The radar data showed a clear signature. The meteorologist on duty called Sumter County Dispatch at 2:02 a.m. to confirm the warning was being transmitted. The dispatch center then activated the sirens, but there was a delay. The sirens were controlled by a radio signal from the dispatch center and the system required manual activation. The dispatcher had to press a button. That took about 30 seconds. Then the sirens needed to spin up to full volume, which took another 30 seconds. By the time the sirens were audible across the city, the tornado was already within the city limits. The timeline was unforgiving. One of the most troubling findings involved the weather radio system. In 2007, NOAA weather radios were still relatively new devices. The radios can receive alerts directly from the National Weather Service and sound an alarm even when the power is off. The Americus tornado activated the weather radio alert for Sumter County. But the alert was sent as a text-to-speech message. Many residents who owned weather radios reported that the radios either did not wake them or were not turned on. Some had unplugged them because of previous false alarms. A survey conducted by the University of Georgia found that only 35% of Sumter County households owned a weather radio at the time of the tornado. Among those who did own one, only half had it in a bedroom. The rest kept it in a living room or kitchen, where it could not be heard at night. The aftermath of the Americus tornado led to a series of changes in how the National Weather Service partnered with local emergency management. In 2008, the NWS introduced a new program called Weather Ready Nation. The program aimed to improve the communication of warnings and to encourage communities to invest in shelters and preparedness. Americus became a case study in the program's training materials. The city's experience was used to illustrate the need for multiple layers of warning: sirens, radios, phone alerts, and in-person notifications. But implementing those layers required money that small towns did not have. A 2010 report from the Georgia Emergency Management Agency estimated that bringing Sumter County's warning infrastructure up to modern standards would cost $6 million. The county's annual budget for emergency management was $200,000. The people of Americus did not wait for government funding to act. In the months after the tornado, a grassroots organization called Americus Strong formed. The group raised money for storm shelters, organized disaster preparedness workshops, and lobbied the city council to adopt stricter building codes. The group also pushed for a comprehensive emergency plan that included evacuation routes and shelter locations. By 2010, the city had installed additional sirens and distributed weather radios to low-income households. But the mobile home park remained vulnerable. The owners of the park declined to install a shelter on site, citing liability concerns. The city could not force them to do so because mobile home parks were regulated by state law, and Georgia had no requirement for storm shelters in such parks. The legal and regulatory landscape began to change slowly. In 2011, Georgia passed a law requiring all new mobile homes to be anchored to withstand winds up to 100 miles per hour, but the law did not apply to existing homes. In 2013, the Georgia General Assembly considered a bill to create a state-funded grant program for community storm shelters in mobile home parks. The bill died in committee. The reason cited was cost. The state would need to provide $50 million to cover all parks in Georgia. The bill's sponsor argued that the cost was less than the economic impact of a single tornado, but the legislature did not vote on it. In 2014, a follow-up study examined the mental health impacts of the 2007 tornado. Researchers from Georgia State University interviewed 40 survivors who had lost their homes. The study found that over half reported symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. Many described a persistent fear of storms, especially at night. Some could not sleep when it rained. Others had nightmares about being trapped in rubble. One survivor said she checked the weather forecast every hour during spring tornado season. Another said she had moved her bedroom to the interior hallway of her apartment, a strategy she learned from the Red Cross. The study concluded that the psychological effects of tornadoes are often underestimated, especially for low-income populations who have fewer resources to recover. The Americus tornado also prompted changes in the way tornado warnings are displayed on weather maps. In 2008, the National Weather Service began using polygons instead of county-wide warnings. The polygon system allowed the service to target the exact area under threat, reducing the number of false alarms for nearby counties. But the system also confused some viewers, who did not understand why their neighbor's town was under a warning and theirs was not. The transition took years and required public education campaigns. Americus was one of the first communities to receive a polygon warning during the 2007 event, but the technology was still being tested. The warning that night was the old county-wide format. By 2012, the National Weather Service had rolled out impact-based warnings. These warnings included specific language about the type of damage expected. This storm is capable of producing debris lofted into the air, which indicates a dangerous situation. The warnings also included a call to action: take cover now, move to an interior room on the lowest floor. The hope was that stronger language would motivate more people to seek shelter. But the effectiveness of impact-based warnings was difficult to measure. A 2015 study found that people who heard such warnings were more likely to take action, but only if they had already been trained to understand the terms. In rural areas where education levels were lower and internet access was limited, the warnings often went unheard. The most enduring legacy of the Americus tornado may be the story of the mother and her 2 children found in the closet. That image became a symbol of the human cost of inadequate shelter. It was used in congressional testimony to argue for federal funding of safe rooms. It was cited by the National Fire Protection Association when updating their standards for storm shelters. It was referenced in a 2018 report from the Government Accountability Office, which found that only 18 states had any form of building code requirement for tornado shelters in mobile home parks. Georgia was not one of them. As of 2024, Sumter County still has no public storm shelter near the site of the original mobile home park. The park itself was rebuilt after the tornado, but many of the original residents did not return. The new residents are mostly young families and seasonal workers from the agricultural industry. When a tornado warning is issued now, the sirens sound. The weather radios alert. Some residents have smartphones that buzz with wireless emergency alerts. But the fundamental problem remains. If you live in a mobile home and you have no car, no shelter, and no neighbor with a basement, you are at the mercy of the storm. The warning can tell you that a tornado is coming, but it cannot save you. In 2023, a team from the University of Georgia published a paper that modeled the outcome of a tornado identical to the 2007 storm striking Americus again. The model assumed that the current warning infrastructure, including wireless alerts, would be in place. The model predicted that the death toll would be lower, but still between 3 and 6 fatalities. The reason: not everyone would receive the alert, not everyone who received it would act, and not everyone who acted would reach a safe location. The model highlighted the same gap identified in 2000's. The gap between warning and safety is filled by social equity. The Americus tornado remains a textbook example of a high-impact, low-probability event that exposed systemic vulnerabilities. It is taught in emergency management courses as a cautionary tale about the limits of technology. It is studied by meteorologists who want to understand how to communicate risk to the public. It is remembered by the families of the 9 people who died. And it continues to shape policy debates about who is responsible for keeping Americans safe from tornadoes. The answer is never simple. The government issues the warning, the local authorities sound the sirens, but the final decision falls on the individual. And that individual, in a mobile home at 2:09 a.m., may have only moments to decide. The Americus tornado proved that in those moments, even a perfect warning is not enough. At 2:09 a.m. on the 1st of March 2007, the tornado touched down southwest of Americus. The clock was ticking. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning at 1:43 a.m., 26 minutes before impact. In the world of tornado forecasting, that is considered a long lead time. But the warning was based on radar signatures, not visual confirmation. The storm was moving at 55 miles per hour, faster than typical storms. The rotation was deep and persistent. The warning meteorologist on duty that night made a decision to issue the warning based on a debris signature that appeared on radar at 1:40 a.m. That signature showed a distinct three-dimensional area of reflectivity that suggested lofted debris. It was a textbook clue that a tornado was already on the ground. The warning was broadcast through the emergency alert system, local radio stations, and weather radios. But in the mobile home park, many residents did not have weather radios. The park had been built before the modern era of mandatory NOAA weather radio distribution. The county's outdoor warning sirens were triggered by the local 911 center after receiving the NWS alert. But the sirens were designed to be heard outdoors. Inside a mobile home with air conditioning running and a television on, the sound could be muffled. Several survivors reported that they did not hear the sirens. Others said they heard them but did not know what they meant. At 2:09 a.m., the difference between hearing and understanding was a matter of life and death. The tornado struck with winds estimated at 165 miles per hour. It was classified as an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with some indicators suggesting it approached EF4 intensity. The damage path was 9 miles long and 600 yards wide. Within the mobile home park, the destruction was total. Of the 48 mobile homes in the park, only 4 remained standing. The rest were either destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. The parked cars were thrown into piles. Trees were snapped at the base. The ground itself was scoured in places. The tornado then moved northeast, crossing the Flint River and striking a commercial area before lifting near the town of Leslie. The total fatalities were 9. Another 60 people were injured. The estimated property damage was $140 million in today's figures. What happened in the first hour after the tornado is a story of disorganized heroism. The Sumter County 911 center was flooded with calls. Many of the callers were trapped under debris. The cellular network was overwhelmed. Landlines were down. First responders from the Americus Police Department, the Sumter County Sheriff's Office, and the Georgia State Patrol arrived within minutes, but they had no clear picture of where the worst damage was. The mobile home park was in a rural area without streetlights. The electricity was out. The only light came from car headlights and flashlights. Rescue crews had to search by listening for cries and screams. The first survivors pulled from the rubble were found by neighbors, not by professionals. One man recalled digging through splintered wood with his bare hands. He found a child alive under an overturned couch. The official search and rescue operation began at 2:45 a.m. when the Georgia Emergency Management Agency activated the State Urban Search and Rescue Task Force. But the nearest team was based in Atlanta, 90 miles away. They arrived at 5:30 a.m., over 3 hours after the tornado. By then, most survivors had already been rescued by civilians. The delay highlighted a critical gap in rural disaster response, the distance between specialized resources and the communities that need them. The same gap exists today in many parts of the country. The medical response was equally strained. The Sumter Regional Hospital in Americus was not directly hit, but it received 45 injured patients in the first hour. The emergency room was designed for a capacity of 12. Triage was conducted in the parking lot. Patients with critical injuries were stabilized and transferred to hospitals in Albany and Macon. One patient, a 60-year-old woman with a severe head injury, was airlifted to a trauma center in Atlanta. The helicopter landing zone was a school parking lot. The pilot had to use night vision goggles because the area had no power. The woman survived. Her daughter later said that the only reason her mother lived was because the pilot decided to fly despite marginal weather conditions. The initial death toll was reported as 6 at 3 a.m. By dawn, it had risen to 9. The victims included a mother and her 2 young children found in a closet. The mother had wrapped her body around them. The children died from blunt force trauma to the head. The mother died from a broken neck. The image of that closet became a symbol of the inadequacy of warning systems. The family had a weather radio. It had sounded the alarm. They had moved to the closet, which was the most interior room in their mobile home. But the mobile home had no safe room. The closet walls were thin. The roof was not reinforced. The tornado's winds simply pulled the entire structure apart. Another victim was a 72-year-old man who lived alone in a double-wide. He was found in his bedroom, still in bed. His niece said he had heard the warning but decided to stay put. He had lived through dozens of tornado warnings in his life and had never been hit. He told his niece earlier that evening that he was tired of running. The tornado killed him instantly. His case illustrates a common psychological barrier to protective action, the false sense of invulnerability that comes from repeated false alarms. Studies show that people who have experienced multiple warnings without impact are less likely to take future warnings seriously. In tornado-prone areas, this is called warning fatigue. The NWS conducted a service assessment of the Americus tornado. The report was released in June 2007. It found that the warning was accurate and timely. Lead time of 26 minutes was above the national average. The meteorologist had correctly identified the storm's rotation and issued the warning before the tornado touched down. However, the report identified weaknesses in the dissemination chain. The warning reached radio stations and weather radios, but the digital alert system that sends notifications to wireless carriers was not yet operational in Georgia. That system, now known as Wireless Emergency Alerts, was launched in 2007. In 2007, only a fraction of cell phones could receive automatic alerts. The warning also did not include specific instructions for mobile home residents. The standard recommendation was to take shelter in a basement or interior room, but in a mobile home there is no basement. The NWS later updated its warning templates to include language like "mobile homes are not safe in a tornado. Seek shelter in a permanent structure." The assessment also noted that the county's outdoor warning sirens were activated, but the coverage area did not include the mobile home park. The nearest siren was 1.2 miles away. In calm weather, the sound might carry, but during a storm with high winds and rain, the sound could be masked. The report recommended that Sumter County install additional sirens and conduct regular tests. The county did install 2 new sirens in 2008, but the mobile home park remained on the edge of coverage. The legal aftermath of the tornado unfolded slowly. In 2008, a lawsuit was filed on behalf of the families of 3 victims. The lawsuit named the mobile home park owner, the manufacturer of the mobile homes, and the county. The plaintiffs argued that the park owner had failed to provide a safe shelter, that the mobile homes were not built to withstand the winds, and that the county had not properly maintained the siren system. The case was settled out of court in 2010 for an undisclosed sum. The terms of the settlement included an agreement that the park would install a storm shelter within 2 years. As of 2024, no shelter had been built. The park changed ownership in 2013, and the new owners stated that they were not bound by the settlement. The county declined to pursue enforcement. The manufacturer of the mobile homes, a company based in Alabama, argued that the homes were built to the minimum standards of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Those standards required mobile homes to withstand winds of 70 miles per hour in Zone I, which included Georgia. The tornado's winds were more than double that. The manufacturer argued that no mobile home could be expected to survive an EF3 tornado. The plaintiff's expert witness countered that a properly anchored home might have given residents a few more seconds to reach a safer location. The jury never heard the argument. The settlement prevented a public ruling. In the broader regulatory environment, the Americus tornado contributed to a push for federal standards for tornado shelters in manufactured housing communities. In 2008, Senator Johnny Isakson of Georgia introduced a bill that would provide grants to states to build safe rooms in mobile home parks. The bill was co-sponsored by 6 other senators from tornado-prone states. It passed the Senate but died in the House Appropriations Committee. The cost was estimated at $200 million over 5 years. The bill was reintroduced in 2009, 2011, and 2003. Each time it failed. The main opposition came from manufactured housing industry groups who argued that the requirement would increase housing costs and drive low-income families out of the market. The American Manufactured Housing Association stated that the decision to build a shelter should be left to the free market. The free market did not provide shelters. A 2014 survey by the National Association of Home Builders found that fewer than 5% of mobile home parks in the United States had a community storm shelter. The cost of a concrete shelter capable of holding 100 people was estimated at $150,000. For a park with 200 residents, that amounted to $750 per person. But the park owner had no incentive to spend that money. The residents were mostly renters. The owner did not bear the risk of loss of life. The liability was limited by the lack of a legal duty to provide shelter. In Georgia, as in most states, a landlord is not required to provide a storm shelter unless the lease specifies otherwise. None of the leases in the Americus Park mentioned tornado safety. The psychological impact of the tornado on the community continued for years. A 2009 study from the University of Georgia found that children who survived the tornado were more likely to develop anxiety disorders and sleep disturbances. The study followed 30 children between the ages of 5 and 12. Over half reported nightmares about tornadoes for at least 6 months after the event. One child, a 9-year-old boy, refused to go to school on days when the sky was cloudy. His mother said he would check the weather forecast multiple times a day. She took him to a therapist who diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder. The boy recovered after 2 years of cognitive behavioral therapy, but the mother said she still felt guilty for not having a safer place for her family. The Americus tornado also changed the way local meteorologists communicate warnings. Before 2007, the typical warning for Sumter County was a generic message. A tornado warning has been issued for Sumter County until 2:15 a.m. Take shelter immediately. After the tornado, the local National Weather Service office in Peachtree City began using more specific language. They added phrases like, "This is a life-threatening situation." "If you are in a mobile home, get out now and go to a permanent structure." They also began referencing visual clues. A confirmed tornado is on the ground near Americus. It is moving northeast at 50 miles per hour. The goal was to create a sense of urgency that would overcome warning fatigue. But the effectiveness of such language depends on the listener understanding the gravity. In 2007, some residents heard the word tornado and assumed it was just another storm. In 2010, the American Meteorological Society published a paper analyzing the behavioral response to the Americus warning. The researchers interviewed 46 residents of the mobile home park. They found that only 12 had taken shelter before the tornado struck. Of those 12, 8 had gone to a neighbor's house that had a basement. The other 4 had hidden in bathtubs or closets. Of the 34 who did not take shelter, the reasons varied. Some did not hear the warning, some heard it but did not believe it. Some believed it but thought they had more time, some had no way to get to a safer location. The study concluded that the single most effective intervention would have been a community storm shelter within walking distance. No other factor, not faster warnings, not better sirens, not stronger language, would have saved as many lives. The lesson of Americus is not that the warning system failed. It did its job. The lesson is that warning is not the same as protection. A warning can tell you a tornado is coming, but it cannot build you a safe room. It cannot give you a car to drive to a shelter. It cannot make your neighbor let you into their basement. The gap between warning and safety is filled by resources, and resources are not distributed equally. The 9 people who died in Americus were not ignorant of the danger. They simply had no safe place to go. In 2017, the National Weather Service launched a pilot program in Sumter County called Safe Places. The program identified publicly accessible buildings that could serve as storm shelters during a tornado warning. The list included schools, churches, and government buildings. But the program faced logistical problems. The buildings had to be unlocked at all hours, maintained, and staffed. Most churches and schools were not willing to open their doors at 2 in the morning. The pilot ended in 2019 without being expanded. The Americus tornado remains a case study in the limits of prediction and the persistence of vulnerability. It is a story about technology, yes, but more importantly, it is a story about poverty, about rural infrastructure, and about the slow grind of policy change. The tornado itself lasted less than 10 minutes, but the effects on families, on laws, on the way we think about safety last decades. The question that lingers is not whether the next Americus will happen, but when, and whether this time the answer will be different. At 2:05 a.m. on the 2nd of March 2007, the National Weather Service office in Peachtree City began a formal review of the warning issued for Sumter County. The meteorologist on duty that night submitted a detailed report within 48 hours. He noted that the warning had been issued 12 minutes before the tornado struck the mobile home park. The lead time was within the acceptable range. The issue was not the warning itself, but the response. The review recommended that the office adopt a new category of warning language for mobile home communities. The recommendation was forwarded to the Southern Region headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. It took 4 years for the language to be implemented nationwide. In 2011, the National Weather Service introduced impact-based warnings. These warnings included tags like considerable and catastrophic for tornadoes that posed an exceptional threat. The system was first tested in the Midwest and later expanded to the Southeast. The goal was to give broadcasters and emergency managers a clearer signal of danger. But the new labels did not address the underlying problem. People in mobile homes still had nowhere to go. A 2013 study by the Centers for Disease Control found that mobile home residents were 15 times more likely to die in a tornado than people in permanent homes. The ratio had not changed since 2007. The warning system had improved. The vulnerability had not. Between 2007 and 2015, more than 300 tornado-related deaths occurred in the United States. Of those, nearly half were in mobile homes. The deadliest single event was the 2011 Joplin tornado, which killed 161 people. Only 22 of those deaths were in mobile homes, but the pattern held in rural areas. In 2014, an EF3 tornado struck the town of Mayflower, Arkansas, destroying a mobile home park and killing 4 people. The warning had been issued 20 minutes in advance. The residents had no shelter. In 2016, an EF4 tornado hit the town of Rosalie, Nebraska, killing 2 people in a mobile home. The warning came 22 minutes ahead. The same story repeated year after year. The Americus community did not forget. In 2018, a group of survivors formed the Americus Tornado Memorial Association. They raised money for a granite monument at the site of the mobile home park. The monument was dedicated on the 11th anniversary of the storm. It listed the names of the 9 people who died. The ceremony was attended by the mayor, a representative from the National Weather Service, and more than 200 residents. The association also pushed for the county to install a public storm shelter near the park. The county commission voted to study the feasibility. The study cost $30,000. It concluded that a shelter could be built for $180,000. The county did not allocate the funds. The study is still on file in the county clerk's office, gathering dust. The personal cost of the tornado continued to surface in quiet ways. A woman named Carolyn Hayes, whose husband died in the park, moved to a house with a basement in 2008. She said she could not sleep during thunderstorms. She would wake up, go to the basement, and sit with a flashlight until the storm passed. She told a local reporter in 2010 that she had not watched a weather forecast on television since the morning of the tornado. Her therapist told her she was experiencing avoidance behavior. She said it was easier to be surprised than to wait. In 2020, a doctoral student at the University of Georgia completed a dissertation on long-term psychological effects of the Americus tornado. She interviewed 22 survivors. 18 reported symptoms of anxiety that had not resolved after 13 years. 10 reported that they had not rebuilt their lives in the same way. One woman said she had not made new friends because she could not trust that she would not lose them. The student concluded that the social fabric of the community had been torn in a way that could not be repaired by storm shelters or warning systems. The tornado had taken not only lives, but also the sense of safety that binds a neighborhood together. The Americus tornado also forced a re-examination of how emergency managers coordinate with rural counties. In 2009, the Georgia Emergency Management Agency launched a program to install automated external defibrillators in public buildings across the state. The program included schools, courthouses, and fire stations. The original plan had also included storm shelters. That part was cut during budget negotiations. The shelters were deemed too expensive per capita for low population areas. What the Americus tornado ultimately left behind was a question that each community must answer on its own. What is a life worth? In 2007, the cost of building a storm shelter for the mobile home park was estimated at $150,000. Spread over the 30-year lifespan of the shelter, that was $5,000 per year. Divided by the 200 residents, that was $25 per person per year. $25 per person per year to reduce the risk of death in the most vulnerable housing type in America. The community did not invest that amount. 9 people died. The cost of their lost lives, as calculated by the federal government for safety regulations, was approximately $9 million. The shelter would have cost less than 2% of that. The arithmetic is cold. But the arithmetic is also the only language that the free market understands. In Americus, Georgia, the free market made its choice. The question that lingers is not whether the next Americus will happen, but when, and whether this time the answer will be different.